Welcome to the Festival of Storytellers. I thank everybody that's involved with this process because we know writers need readers and writers need publishers.
Experience is not about the publisher, it is about us, the authors.
Welcome, readers and book lovers, to another session of the Festival of Storytellers. Hope you're enjoying the variety of authors and books being presented, and I'm one of them. My session is, I'm Stephen D. Sears. I'm the author of In the Beginning, A Consideration of Genesis. I've done 6 of these. This is my 7th session. Today, I'm going to talk about Judah and Tamar. This is one of the many stories that nobody knows in Genesis. And it's a story with a lot of excitement. And it's actually one of the most dramatic scenes in all the Bible. And again, this is part of why I wrote this book, because there's so much material in Genesis, and it's interesting for people to know more about it. So, Judah and Tamar. So this story, earlier in this series, I wrote a chapter called The 12 Things You Need to Know About Genesis. Well, in this story, you're going to see examples of 8 of them. This story shows how it's important to realize that all of this happens at the cusp of history and prehistory. It's very specific. It shows that people move around a lot. There's a lot of sex in it. Hello. There's, again, a lot of family dysfunction going on. The men are bent. The women are equally bent. But women find a way to affect the story. All these things are going to be shown. So I'm going to read most of this from the 18th chapter of my book. It'll give you a sense of how the book reads, how it feels. So this is Judah and Tamar. So let me set the scene. Before you read about this in Genesis, we first meet Joseph, one of the sons of Jacob. We haven't really met him before this period. So we have a chapter about Joseph where he's a young man of 17. He's really irritating. He's the son of Rachel, the only son of Rachel at this point. All the other brothers don't get along with him because Jacob favors Rachel over his other wife, and he favors Joseph over all his other sons. So the sons are so upset with Joseph that they plan to kill him. But in the end, instead of that, they sell him to a caravan that takes him to Egypt, where he's sold into slavery to a man called Potiphar. So then, instead of going on with that story, we have this story. So it's called An Important Interlude, and it starts with why Judah, and why now? Joseph's story has just started with his selling into slavery in Egypt when it is interrupted. Genesis for a chapter drops Joseph and instead gives us the story about Judah and Tamar. This was yet another story from Genesis that I never heard of before, so we will again spend some time looking into this story. I was able to participate in a talk by Gary Rensburg, sponsored by the Biblical Archaeological Society on Genesis on August 26, 2021, when I just started writing this book. Dr. Rensburg's main point had to do with the writing of Genesis. He holds that the final present version of Genesis that we know of was probably written around 1100 to 1000 BC, about the time of the great Israelite monarchy. These writers wish to look at their past as a kind of preview of their present state. We believe, that is me and the reader, believe that this story of Judah and Tamar was also an added story from that time. Dr. Rensburg suggests that this story is placed as a kind of justification for David's taking of Bathsheba as his wife by illegitimate means, who subsequently becomes the mother of Solomon and future kings of Israel. We think it has a larger but similar purpose. But first comes the question, why Judah? As usual, a close reading of Genesis gives us the answer. So I'm going to highlight what the next chapter talks about. So Judah is the fourth son of Jacob. Why would the genealogy going through Jacob go through his fourth son? Why not his first son, his second son, his third son? Genesis gives us clues about that. So the second and third sons, good to see the chats coming. So the second, third sons are Simeon and Levi. However, Jacob leaves Canaan because he gets out of sorts with his brother Esau. He lives with Laban, his uncle, for a long time. He lives there 20 years. He finally leaves with his two wives and all his children. And on the way back to Canaan, he stops in Shechem. He ends up having a big problem with Shechem because Shechem is the son of the ruler of that area, and he takes Dinah, a daughter of Jacob, and basically kidnaps her and rapes her. Then he wants to marry her. So what are they going to do about that? Well, while Jacob and Shechem's father are trying to decide, Levi and Simeon, along with the other brothers, come up with a plan. And their plan is, we're going to invite the people of Shechem to intermarry with us, but we're going to require that they get circumcised. They agree to it. All the men get circumcised. But soon after they do that, Levi and Simeon take weapons and kill all of them. They kill all of them. They take people into slavery. They loot all of the area. They trash it. Jacob doesn't know about this. And he says, you caused me to be a stench in all of this area. So basically, the two sons dishonor themselves by doing that. Shortly after that, Rachel has her last son, Benjamin, and dies. And we're told that right after that time, Reuben, the oldest, sleeps with his father's maidservant, Bilhah. Bilhah happens to be the maid of Rachel, who just died. And because he does this while Jacob is still alive, he dishonors himself as well. So those three sons in Genesis show reasons why they are no longer considered speaking for the family. So these three oldest sons all commit acts which disqualify them from assuming the mantle of eldest son, so that moving into the future, they lose the stature to speak for the family. It is now Judah's counsel that is most listened to and honored. See how we're doing? Yeah, good. Why now? Remember all those genealogies we have run across in Genesis? We have followed them first from Adam to Noah, then from Noah to Abraham. But how does Abraham's line of descendant go forward? While we shortly read about the eventful history of Joseph, Jacob's line of descendant received from Abraham will not pass through Joseph. It will in fact pass through Judah, Jacob's fourth son. And the story we're about to read will tell us how it all comes about. How important is this story? When we get to the New Testament, the first book we read is Matthew. How does Matthew start out? Yes, my friends, with another genealogy. And what do we find in chapter 1, verse 1? The genealogy of Jesus, the son of David, the son of Abraham. And there in verse 3, quote, Judah, the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. Perez, the father of Hezron. And on it goes all the way to David. Both Jews and Christians share in this descent, and it all comes from Judah. But we needed this story of Judah and the remarkable woman Tamar for David and Jesus to ever get into the story. We also look at this story so that we can see it with a fresh view and not through the lens of Mosaic laws or religious biases. Remember, there are no religions happening or described in Genesis. We are particularly annoyed with the NIV commentary's characterization of Judah and Tamar. Quote, the unsavory events of this chapter illustrate the danger that Israel as God's separated people faced if they remained among the Canaanites. Judah's actions contrasted with those of Joseph, demonstrating the moral superiority of Joseph, to whom leadership in Israel fell in his generation. We completely disagree with this slanted view of what transpires between Judah and Tamar. When we first read in this story, Judah left his brothers, the commentary further states, Joseph was separated from his brothers by force, but Judah voluntarily separated himself to seek his fortune among the Canaanites. Wait a minute, didn't Abraham also voluntarily go to seek his fortune in Canaan? We don't know exactly why Judah leaves his brothers. Let's not ascribe all kinds of dubious moral reasons for moving to a new area away from his brothers. Judah marries a Canaanite woman. Joseph eventually marries an Egyptian woman. Isaac and Jacob marry women from their extended family. But as we have seen, it is never clear that the women they marry, worship the one true God. No moral claims should be made for and against any of these people, simply on where they lived or whom they married. So now we're going to look at Judah and his sons. Yep, still doing good for time. We now get, quote unquote, an account of Judah. The first thing we are told is, at that time, Judah left his brothers and went down to stay with a man of Adullam named Hira. At that time would seem to me not long after the brothers sell Joseph to the caravan. But Genesis is not more direct than that. The NIV commentary notes that Adullam was a town southwest of Jerusalem, so this would not put Judah very far away from the rest of his family, that of Jacob and Judah's brothers, and even his grandfather Isaac, who are now living in Hebron. While there, Judah meets the daughter of a Canaanite man named Shua. Judah marries the daughter, who throughout the story is never given a specific name. She then produces 3 sons for Judah, E-R, Onan, and Shelah. This new family is now living in Kezib, about 3 miles west of Adullam. By verse 6, the oldest son is an adult and ready for marriage himself. Genesis says that Judah himself gets a wife for and his son's new wife is named Tamar. We are never given any further information about Tamar's lineage. But before and Tamar can produce any children or sons, dies. Apparently not any death. Quote from Genesis, but Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death. Genesis never gives us any information on what did that was wicked. The situation then gets wrapped up in the customs of the time, which, as we shall see, many do not agree with. Judah informs his second son, lie with your brother's wife and fulfill your duty to her as a brother-in-law to produce offspring for your brother. But Onan will not do it, precisely because any offspring from his sexual encounter with Tamar would be considered and not his. So while he does have sexual relations with Tamar, he pulls himself out before ejaculating, or as Genesis says, so whenever he lay with his brother's wife, he spilled his semen on the ground. Onan's actions has even been given rise to a modern word, onanism, coitus interruptus, in a known form of birth control. But people of that day were not interested in birth control. Yes, genealogy. Oh my goodness, yes. We'll talk more about that. This amounted to purposely refusing to have heirs for his brother and potentially for himself. The judgment of this in Genesis, what he did was wicked in the Lord's sight, so he, the Lord, put him, Onan, to death. Also, we wonder if something similar interfered with the sexual relations between and Tamar, as is put to death for some kind of wickedness also, and she was not able to produce any heirs for Tamar has now lost both of her men, her husband and then his brother. Did Onan ever marry her? This is not clear. Judah then sends Tamar back to live with her father's house, to live as a widow. Judah promises to marry her to his third son, Shelah, when he is old enough. But Genesis is clear that Judah never plans to allow his third son to ever marry Shelah. That's his son. Genesis tells us what Judah is really thinking. Shelah may die too, just like his brothers. So Tamar goes to live with her father, banished really to her father's house. Oops. Let's see. Father's house. Here we go. Tamar sideline has her revenge. Good question. We might get to that. Tamar, a long time goes by. As will later become clear, Shelah has now become old enough to marry, but Tamar is never brought back for him to marry. She is still resigned to living as a widow with her father, but now things change for Judah as Judah's wife dies. Judah goes through a period of mourning, but he still has to make a living. When a suitable mourning time has passed, Judah, goes up to Timnah, where men are shearing his sheep, and he goes there with his longtime friend, Hira the Adullamite. Hira has obviously been a good friend, for it was Judah's friendship with Hira that led Judah to live in and near Adullam before he was even married. Tamar hears that Judah's wife has died and that he is now going about his life per normal. Not so, poor Tamar. After all these years, she has not been allowed to marry Judah's other son, but apparently seems unable to marry anyone else either. She is stuck as a kind of perpetual widow. As we will now see, Tamar has been aware of and thinking about her situation for all these years, and she is not willing to accept the fate that Judah has given her. As we have seen many times in Genesis, a woman now takes action to affect her life in the story of the ongoing relationship of God and humankind. The steps she now takes are calculated, radical, and could threaten her morality as a woman and even her life. Her actions are both brave and desperate. She takes off her widow's clothes, covers herself with a veil to disguise herself, but otherwise dresses in a fetching or deliberately sexual way and sits down to the entrance of Enaim directly on the road to Timnah. Genesis tells us all this is deliberate, for Tamar saw that though Shelah had grown up, she had not been given to him as a wife. We soon see why she did this. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute and did not realize that this was his daughter-in-law. He approaches her and asks to sleep with her. Tamar plays along. And what will you give me to sleep with you? Judah promises to send her a young goat. Tamar wants something that is specific to Judah, something personally his. She suggests and said, will you give me something as a pledge until you send it? Judah asked her what would she like as a pledge. Tamar has obviously already decided what that pledge should be. Your seal and its cord and the staff in your hand. Judah hands it over. They go somewhere and have sexual relations. Just as it was head scratching to understand how Jacob, on his wedding night, could mistake ugly Leah for beautiful Rachel, we are surprised that when they get down to it, he cannot recognize his own daughter-in-law. We should remember that even today in Arab countries, women are supposed to be completely covered, so it is possible that only after a man is committed to marriage would he ever see a moral woman's face or any other part of her body. Judah still does not recognize her. He lays with her. Tamar becomes pregnant. Judah later remembers his pledge and sends the promised goat. Indeed, sends it by his friend Hira, but his friend can now not find the prostitute. Hira inquires around among the men of the area. Where is the shrine prostitute who was beside the road at Enaim? He is told that no one has ever seen such a woman around here. Hira comes back to Judah and reports on the failure of his errand. Not only is he unable to find this woman, no one ever remembers even seeing such a woman. Judah is resigned to not having his payment to the prostitute ever received, and is resigned to losing his pledges. Let her keep what she has, or we will become a laughingstock. The woman has obviously deceived him. It would be embarrassing to him to make a big scene. 3 months pass. Judah is informed your daughter-in-law Tamar is pregnant. It is assumed that this has happened as a result of Tamar engaging in prostitution or having relations outside of marriage. Equally bad, I would expect. It never occurs to Judah to consider that Tamar might have been his missing prostitute. Judah orders Tamar to be brought out and burned to death. This was apparently a common practice, a common penalty for being guilty of engaging in prostitution. Surely, Tamar must have known this when she took such a radical step. In one of the most riveting scenes in all the Bible, as Tamar is being led out to be burned, probably publicly, she sends a message to Judah, her father-in-law. I am pregnant by this man who owns these. See if you recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are. Judah recognizes them as his. He is abashed and contrite. He immediately recognizes the wrong he has long done to Tamar, and then humbly admits it. She is more righteous than I, since I wouldn't give her to my son Shelah. Genesis then adds significantly, and he did not sleep with her again. Nothing more is said, either about Judah's future family relations or whether Tamar ever gets to marry anyone else. But we are told about the child Tamar is about to have through Judah. Once again, twin boys, just like Isaac has his twins, Esau and Jacob. And once again, it is an unusual birth. When Tamar is about to give birth, she has a midwife to help. As she's starting to give birth, the midwife suddenly realizes that Tamar is having twins. One twin puts out his hand, so the midwife ties a scarlet thread around its wrist and tells Tamar, this one's coming out first. But the baby draws back its hand, and his brother comes out first. The midwife then says to the new baby, so this is how you have broken out. This baby is called Perez. Then the baby with the scarlet thread comes out, the second baby. This baby was called Zerah. Here we see again how the women in Genesis, so often seen as powerless and at the mercy of the men in their life, still somehow find a way to affect the story of their lives and of future lives. We also see again the greatness of God. How God can make out of what looks like an immoral act or a strange twist of family relationships something that becomes great. Once again, this line comes down not through the usually favored first son, but from what would usually be considered the secondary sons of the family. Women, once again, use sex and the ability to produce heirs for their men to gain control of their lives. Tamar's cunning and bravery could have led her to disaster, but her own actions, by her own actions, she redeems herself and secures her own righteousness before all. Finally, we leave this story with a final observation from the Midrash. When Joseph's brothers bring back his multicolored coat, now full of blood and torn up, the Midrash claims that it was Judah who presented it to Jacob, and Judah who said, recognize whether or not this is your son's garment. So it is that Judah now experiences in this scene with Tamar a turnabout and humbling. When Tamar says to him, see if you recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are. Judah ends up on both ends of subterfuge. With Joseph and Jacob, he helps propagate it. With Tamar, he is now its victim. That's the story of Judah and Tamar. What an exciting story. So anyway, I had some questions going along. So again, this story shows, do you ever wonder why people don't know about the fact? That's a good question. Do you ever wonder why people don't know? I think most people don't think about when exactly the Bible was written. And that was actually part of why Dr. Rensburg had his, like kind of a workshop, because scholars have looked into that And I think it's generally considered that the version of Genesis we now know was written sometime around the monarchy period. And, I'm sure there's probably theories about when some of the other things have written. Like I know I've heard that supposedly Isaiah, the book of Isaiah, includes things not just from Isaiah, but some other prophet as well that's matched together. So there's all kinds of theories and all kinds of history that goes into just where all the Gospels, well, all the books of the Bible come. And of course, there's a whole big subject on the books that didn't make it to the Bible, particularly in the New Testament. There's all these other books that people know about that essentially didn't make the cut. So, but yeah, it's here we go. If I'm correct, genealogy was a very important matter in Jewish families, and to be fair, it's still the same. Well, to be fair, it's still the same. Well, that's a funny thing. When I wrote my book, one of the things in my preface I say is I'm going to apologize in advance for putting down all these genealogies because I love them and they tell you a lot of important information. And tomorrow, when we look at the three outsiders, I'm going to use genealogy to make some points about how Esau gets along with his neighbors, because you can parse it out through tracing these genealogies. And obviously the Bible is very concerned with those, because they, in addition to Genesis and Chronicles, oh my goodness, there's genealogies for all 12 of the sons of Jacob that go on for long generations. Do you believe that the events in the Bible? This is another chat here. While true, do not necessarily explain the whole truth. Well, part of what I think, I shouldn't speak for them, but I'll hazard a guess. Part of what the Midrash tradition claims is that, in addition to the written, where there's this oral tradition that came along with it, it's not considered as significant or as well authenticated, but it comes along with it, and at some point they started writing down some of these oral traditions. But I think they go back to what the events were and what some of the people did. So in writing the book, I thought it was useful to at least consider some of them, and some of the facts, particularly that they have. You could see why they might not have been put in the book, but would you say that circumcision is still necessary? That's I wouldn't make that. Years ago, circumcision was designed a way to mark yourself as of God. I know Christians feel the same way about baptism. It's a different way. I would say it's one way to mark yourself as God. I'm not sure that either Christians or Jews necessarily need to do it, but it's one way to do it. Anyway, I'm almost out of time. I want to thank you all for joining me. Tomorrow I'll be back for one more session, the three outsiders of Genesis. They would be Ishmael, Esau, and Joseph. I'm going to end up with something remarkable Joseph does at the very end of Genesis in chapter 50. Again, this is my book, In the Beginning, Consideration of Genesis. It's on Amazon. It's on Barnes & Noble, and it's also available through my publisher, Zulon. Thanks for being here, and I will see you tomorrow. Take care and goodbye.